Thank you, President Donna. Buenas tardes a todos. Today's speaker is Dr. Armando Ibarra, who is an associate professor in the Department of Labor Education at the University of Wisconsin Extension. He earned his PhD degree in political science from the University of California, Irvine, and holds a master's in public administration and a BA degree in sociology and Spanish. His research and fields of specialization are Chicano and Latino working communities, applied research, adult education on issues of diversity in the workplace, international labor migration, and leadership development, which is what he'll be talking to us about today. We look forward to your presentation, Professor Ibarra, and we have made a contribution to the Rotary International Polio Plus Fund as a way to say thank you for speaking to us today. Bienvenidos.
Good afternoon, everybody. What a pleasure it is to be here with you today and to be talking on a very timely topic with regards to our community here in Dane County and specifically in Madison. The title of my presentation today is Listening to Their Stories, How Latinos Survive and Thrive in Rural and Urban Wisconsin. This talk is based on a study that I conducted for the UW Cooperative Extension with regards to how families are incorporating into their local communities, meaning how are they becoming part of the political, economic, and social fabric of where they live and where they call home. So this study I conducted between 2014 and 2016, and it's the basis for what I will be talking on today. But before I get started, I wanted to thank several folks. I wanted to thank you all Rotarians. I wanted to thank their guests. I especially wanted to thank Oscar for making the initial invitation. Thank you, Oscar. And always, and at the top of my list, I want to thank my wife for joining me as well. Yeah, I'm pretty lucky. So what you have here is just a quick picture of the actual demographic report that we produced when we talk about Latino Wisconsin. If you want the full report, please email me or contact me and I'll get it to you. This is where I will draw the talking points for this initial part of the presentation. So briefly, just look at the transformation in the last 24 years. So as you see, there's been a dramatic increase in both the population, the Latino population in Wisconsin, but also in its dispersion. So now we have large communities of Latinos throughout Wisconsin. For here, I'll look at, for example, Greene County and Brown County, Fond du Lac County. They're counties that at one point really didn't see any substantial numbers of folks that are coming and actually settling in this area. And now in places like Green Bay, we see that there's upwards to 20 to 30,000 Latinos that are calling that area home now. So what I'd like to talk about when I show these maps is Wisconsin is going through a similar demographic shift as the rest of the country. It is not immune to this shift that is changing the demographic composition of who we are as a people in our country. And more specifically now, when we look at Dane County, we see this similar shift that's taking place here. When in 1990, the census counted only around 5,700 Latinos in the area. And as of 2014, this number was up to 32,000. I suspect, and what demographers and sociologists tell us, is that there's between a 5 and 10% undercount of this population. Now, why would there be an undercount of this population? Because some folks don't want to participate in census because of their precarious immigration status. And so we don't get accurate counts. So I suspect in my work, there's probably upwards to 40 to 45,000 Latinos in Dane County today. So then we have a percentage of some of the municipalities, and I selected these because there were the larger cities here. We see, like, for example, in the town of Madison, almost 32% of the population is Latino. In Fitchburg, it's close to 20% of the population is Latino. In Cottage Grove, the village of Cottage Grove, you're going up to 13%. In Madison, where we have the largest concentration of the Latino population, it's around 6.6%. The population is substantial, and if trends continue, it will increase. And by 2050, Latinos will comprise about 30 to 33% of our population here locally, if these trends continue. So approximately 60% of this population is native-born, folks. What that means is that the Latino that's in Dane County was more than likely born in Wisconsin. 40% of this native-born population was born in Wisconsin, okay? About 10% of it was born in another state, and about 4% in a U.S. held territory. And by this, we mean Puerto Rico. 40% is foreign-born. The majority of this 40% are folks that are immigrating from Mexico. 72% of Latinos self-identify as either Mexican or Mexican-American. The median age is about 25 years old for the Latino population. So it's a substantially younger population than non-Latinos. For non-Latinos, you're talking an age of 35. So we have a population inverse here, meaning that this population is coming of age and coming into the workforce, while non-Latinos are going to be retiring out, which what you see right now. And the Latinos have larger than average families. So the Latino average family in Dane County is about 3.7 people per family, and for non-Latinos it's 2.9. So what I just sketched out for you all here is this demographic shift. And folks, let me be clear. This demographic shift is going to take place irregardless of what happens at the border. Okay? And this was taking place simply because of the high birth rate of this population, which is about 3 to 1. 3 births to every 1 birth for non-Latinos. So we can build a wall, we can stop immigration from all sending countries. This shift will still take place in our country. Now, labor force participation. What we see here is that Latinos are part of the workforce, are in the labor force at similar numbers as non-Latinos, okay? So they're working, and they're working in similar rates as everybody else. And the industries that employ the highest number of Latinos right now are the entertainment, recreation, accommodation, and food service industry. Go to any restaurant on State Street, pay attention, listen to the back where the folks are working. More than likely, you're going to hear folks speaking in Spanish, workers speaking in Spanish, or some sort of Spanish language media or music that's taking place while they work. Educational, healthcare, and social assistance. And I'm going to jump to the bottom one, construction. This was surprising to us. We thought this number would be a lot larger. Construction jobs are usually good paying, family sustaining jobs. And when we saw that 7% of Latinos of the workforce is a part of construction, it was something that we had a conversation about. So median household income is a good indicator as to how this population is doing. And if you see, now take this into consideration, Latinos participate in the workforce at similar rates as non-Latinos. But when we look at median household income, we see that they make about 58% less than non-Latino families. That is a big gap. And that is somewhere where I think that a lot of work needs to be done. So they make roughly about $28,000 less per family household as non-Latinos. And so what this is it's a graph that just basically shows the breakdown of where Latinos fall in with regards to family household income. Interestingly enough, you can see that there's a high-end earner within the Latino population in Dane County as well. And I attribute that to Madison, to UW-Madison and the tech startups here in Madison as well, that are attracting that type of professional to the area. The poverty rate is something that's alarming to me when we see that this population is working in similar rates, is participating in the workforce in these industries, and they still continue to have a 23% poverty rate. Interesting. As opposed to about 6% for non-Latino families. So 23% of Latino families in Dane County live in poverty. That has some real impacts on our community as a whole that we can address at a later date. So with this population shift, and with one of the markers that I like to always talk about is look at the schools. What is the composition of the schools? Look at them today, and this is what you can see into the future. So if we look at the Latino student population, we see that it's increased drastically even in the last 5 years. And the Latino student has more than doubled at the elementary and middle school levels and nearly doubled at the high school level. In some of the counties around the states, if it wasn't for Latino students, schools would close. Interesting, right? At least to me it is. So what I want to talk a little bit about next is this part of the study. So intuitively, we know there's a lot going on, but when we engage in this study, it was to understand how some of these families are surviving and hopefully being prepared to thrive. So one of the things that I always like to assess is, aspirations and optimism. What is it that adults with families aspire for themselves and for their children? So what we found is, I'll read this off and then count. Latino parents held high levels of optimism and aspiration for their children's future. In almost every case, including for those with undocumented children, Latino parents felt that their children had a good chance at achieving a promising future if they were successful in school. Immigrant parents expressed a sense of personal sacrifice for their children. Many considered themselves to be the sort of sacrificial generation. They're sacrificing their generation for the sake of their children. And feel that they must do whatever is necessary to help their children get ahead. Parents expressed concern that if they do not sacrifice, their children will suffer a similar fate as theirs and be relegated to a life dictated by low-paying jobs at the margins of society and suffer a loss of dignity. Latinos are central to the economic well-being of our community in Dane County, in Wisconsin, and across the country, but are marginalized when it comes to social and political spheres. Association with non-Latinos. Well, I just want to read a couple of quotes from that these folks told us. My hope is that my children get educated, that they will be well educated and graduate, that they be good people, that they go on to college, that they go to college and have a future where they can excel in a professional field so that they don't have to suffer or have problems like us. Well, in 20 years, I hope he'll, a child, have a degree or that he'll still be studying, and that he's on his way to being well off, and that we have our papers. By papers, we're talking about documentation, immigrant documentation and status, to stay here in Wisconsin with them. That's our hope, God willing. I think we all have hope for our kids to be someone in life, that hopefully they get further than we have so they don't have to suffer like we suffer. These are all immigrant parents. I want my kids to have a career. I don't want to see them like me, working in low-paying jobs like I work. Their hope is in the next generation, folks. So then another measure of how these folks are surviving and or thriving is who they're interacting with. Who are you breaking bread with? Who are you making community with? And who and where, what spaces you occupy while you're doing these things. So the measure was about inter and intra-ethnic association. Most associate with other Latinos more than with non-Latinos. This was the case regardless of who their close friends were or who they visit or choose to interact with in social gatherings. Most prefer this ethnic association because of the sense of connection they felt due to the shared cultural traits and language. They also interact with non-Latinos on a daily basis at work. This strong sense of association diminishes in the second generation and beyond and amongst those with a college education. So meaning folks like myself and a lot of people in this room are more than likely have secondary or higher ed degrees and are able to navigate in both immigrant and non-immigrant worlds with regard specifically to the Latino population. There's a lot of segregation in the children's schools. Little by little, I involved myself in all the social events, which has helped me a lot. But at first you have your social group and you go where your social group goes. Little by little, you start branching out and going to other places. This was a family that purposely placed themselves in situations where they forced themselves to become fully integrated into their community, even while they were learning English. I understand that my sons are not going to grow up the way I did in Mexico. It will not be the same because although one wants to teach them that traditional culture, it is important that they also be part of their culture here. One of the biggest myths is that Latinos are not acculturating into what we consider to be the American creed. This idea that these folks aren't becoming the type of American that we see as what's made this country great. And I say that's a myth because every study that I've ever read that has data and a methodology behind it tells us this, including the big debates that happened in 2004 and debates that are taking place today as we speak. So these are just barriers, but I want to move on to something else because I know I only have a few minutes left. So that's, if you want to learn more about Latinos in Wisconsin, my good friend Oscar is the editor of an anthology with lots of folks that provided their stories about their experience as being Latinos in Wisconsin. The idea that you have to claim that there's Latinos in Wisconsin in itself is a problematic, right? The idea that Latinos have not been here for almost 100 years is problematic. Latinos are part of the social fabric of Wisconsin and of its identity. So I covered this demographic shift, which is going to continue, folks. It's going to reshape how we look like as a society in Wisconsin and across the country. It's nothing scary. It's very natural. People are people. And it's something that needs to be talked about. I've given you two examples, two measures as to how Latinos are doing within Dane County and in my study areas, how they survive the initial immigrant generation, and then subsequently how the second and beyond generation, my generations, are able to integrate and thrive. Context of reception matters, folks. One of the biggest debates that we've had in the academy with regards to immigrant and subsequent generation is whether context of reception matters. Whether how this population, this initial newcomer population, is greeted by the host population matters to subsequent generations. Okay? So that is the debate that's been had for the last 50 years in the academy. Folks, I am part of that debate, and it's my position that context of this reception absolutely matters to the well-being of future generations and to the well-being of our communities as a whole. And by context of reception, I mean how we treat that initial immigrant population, regardless of status, will have a direct impact on their children and their children's children and on all of us as a society. We're all interconnected. We worship together, we break bread together, we work together, we drive on the same roads, our kids go to the same schools, we have fun together. Many of us cheer for the Badgers, some cheer for the Ohio State, apparently. Apparently. But we're interconnected. And I wanted to give one example of this interconnectedness in an industry that defines who we are as the dairy state. Okay? And for this, I'm talking about the dairy industry. The dairy industry thrives and is so successful only because of the hands and the labor of Mexican and other Latino immigrants. 80% of all dairy products produced in our state are touched and worked on by Latino hands, 90% immigrant. Think about that. The very product, the very industry that shapes our collective identity as Wisconsinites, and I'm including myself there as well, only survives and thrives because of immigrant Latino labor. Forward, I've learned that that's our slogan, Forward Wisconsin. Like our Constitution as a living document, our Americanness, our collective identity is also alive and fluid. It changes with time and reflects who we are as a nation and as a democracy. What we value and how we move towards achieving our democratic ideal, in my estimation, is the essence of who we are as Wisconsinites. There are many in our great state and country who feel that there are irreconcilable differences between Latinos and non-Latinos, but I argue that this is not the case. Latinos are as American as any other newcomer group or ethnic group that has been around for generations. In Wisconsin, Latinos are surviving and thriving. They are reshaping our collective Wisconsin identity, but it's always good to take a step back and reflect on what this means to us as a society. The Latino population is complex and diverse. The Latino population also has a very, very strong work ethic and moral compass. And it believes in the ideals of democracy. So, as being a Latino, being a scholar, a public intellectual as to what I'm doing this is what I bring to Wisconsin as a public servant as well. And I want to thank you all for listening to me, and I welcome questions, comments, concerns, and what have you. One other thing, if you want those worksheets that I drew this data from, please email me and I will get it to you, Armando.Ibarra at uwex.edu.
Thank you, Professor. Roberta Gassman, just very informative and helpful. And I speak as a granddaughter of immigrants, and my parents didn't go to college, and they sent me to what they thought was the best public school they could to achieve just what you talked about. So given this connection between our Latino residents and this huge industry in the state, the dairy industry, and the public conversation going on right now about DACA, and there was front page coverage in the State Journal about this, I think, over the summer. What do you see as what's ahead for our dairy industry given this conversation? Thank you.
It's a very excellent question. Thank you. It's a very complex question as well because there's different layers there. When we talk about the workforce in the dairy industry, let's be clear. The workforce in the dairy industry is unauthorized Latino immigrants. Okay? The dairy industry doesn't stop. It's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Without any replacement of this workforce, that industry would be in big trouble. So there's a couple of things that might happen. The first one is, maybe what I think is going to happen is that the H-2 visas are going to be increased or redefined to be able to import workers on an annual basis, not just on a seasonal basis. The other thing that could happen is that another type of guest worker program is created that will import workers for the dairy industry. Or what can happen is we can have what's called comprehensive immigration reform and have a path towards citizenship where these folks are able to adjust their status. Yeah. So, question.
I'm Karen Kendrick Hands. Thanks for your informative talk. It raised tons of questions, and I didn't ask one last week, so I'm going to ask two today.
Oh, no.
The first one, you can answer that when I'm done. What can we as individuals do if we feel strongly that we need to support the Dreamers? Are there steps individuals can take? But the other one is a more personal question that I experience whenever I eat out on the square, and that's that the people in the back of house and the quiet people who bring my water and my bread and take my dishes away are a very large proportion of Hispanics, and we never speak. The servers who get all our attention and the bulk of our tips, I've only been served once by a Hispanic in the last 7 years of eating out on the square 5 times a week.
Yeah.
Can we change that? And who do we talk to about the perception that the workforces where we dine is not balanced?
Okay. Wow. Okay, first question about DACA. For those of you that don't know what DACA is, DACA was an executive order that was signed by President Obama that gave temporary relief to individuals that met certain criteria. These are called, they've been labeled as the Dreamers, right? The youth that was brought to this country without any fault of their own. Okay, so it created the special status for these folks to be able to adjust to be protected from being deported, which allowed a lot of them to go on to college, which allowed them to get driver's licenses, and allowed them the ability to work legally, whatever that means. They had Social Security numbers. So that executive order has recently been rescinded by President Trump. And so that's part of the conversation that's taking place nationally with what is it that we're going to do with these 800,000 human beings that are going to be forced to learn to be illegal again. That is the conversation. As a representative of the UW right now, I take no position. As an individual, part of the community, there's things that could be done. You can make phone calls, contact your congressional people, voice your opinion, whichever way it goes, and engage in the governance process. The youth are part of what's called the social movement. they've decided to take things and to try to make change on their own. Being locked out of the governance structures, what they're doing is called disruption politics. Not only are you directly lobbying policymakers, decision makers, but you're going to be disrupting activities to bring light to your issue. That is what you see in the newspapers. That is what's taking place today. The second part of your question, it's the industry, right? They call this the secondary economy, where folks work where they can work because of their precarious immigration status. And so mostly you'll see in the service industry, right? Folks that make our food, folks that make our beds, people that clean our homes, are people that are part of what's called the secondary economy. And it's there and it's thriving for a reason. And I'll leave that one at that.
Thank you. Did your research, or is there research that goes into the degrees of assimilation of the second and third generation, particularly in terms of language and religious activity? And is there any correlation between the degree of assimilation and household income?
Yes, there is. That is the debate, right? Whether once a population is acculturated, either whether it's within the immigrant generation or second generation and beyond, what impacts does that acculturation have on that community or that immigrant or ethnic group reaching parity with the dominant group? For this, I look at the work of Ruben Rubao, Alejandro Portes, Minjo, Dahl. So a lot of sociologists and anthropologists that have been trying to test this. There is two debates about assimilation. One is called classical assimilation, straight line assimilation, that by the third generation of an immigrant's group, that they will reach parity with the mainstream population, the dominant population. That is being applied to Mexican Americans as well. But it's been extended a couple of generations for Mexican Americans, okay? So what they say is that if you're of European descent by the third generation, you will be part of the mainstream because you're fully acculturated. But wait a minute, if you're Mexican American, it's gonna take several more generations. Who knows why? I think because of that unique history that Mexico and the US have. And let's be clear as well, that this assimilation theory leaves two main groups out of the debate. Intentionally, in my estimation, that's African America and indigenous populations, because that straight line assimilation does not resonate there well. The other ones, there's another camp within this assimilation debates that has three different trajectories. The first one is straight line assimilation into the fifth generation, you'll reach parity. That's 125 years, folks. Okay, that means my kids, if they choose to have kids, might reach parity with the dominant group. The other one is called downward assimilation, meaning that in the second generation, that generation is going to assimilate into the underclass of the US. Okay, that's another trajectory that was brought onto it. And the last one is called like kind of step line assimilation with lots of patterns going on everywhere, which means basically that the immigrant and their subsequent generations choose as to how they incorporate into the US mainstream. There's a whole nother variation of non-assimilation, assimilation debates I'd be more than happy to talk about over coffee. But yeah, there is substantial literature, and that is what's driving the debates right now with regards to how we're becoming the new America. Just one final thing, just to touch upon that. There's a lot of talk about inequality. It's big in Madison, it's big in Wisconsin, it's big in my state of California, it's big across the country. I just want to be clear about what that means. Inequality is a measure. It's a mathematical construct that shows that there's something wrong with our system because it's producing disparate outcome for people, humans, based on this, right? Phenotypical differences. And I just want to be very clear that that's what that means here. I have one of my mentors is one of the people that I just said, but he has a saying. He says, race is a pigment of our imagination. It's a socially constructed idea that has very real consequences on communities. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Dr. Ibarra. Before we adjourn, I'd like for all of the Rotary Youth Exchange guests to gather in this corner for a photo op. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next week for our last meeting of the year. We adjourn.